Grab your first-class tickets for the Fraser-train. We're hopping aboard and traveling 23 years into the past to explore the movie that bears the most responsibility for launching Brendan Fraser's stellar yet roller coaster career. No offense to our fellow George of the Jungle stans. I love that movie too. In a year that marked some of the most exciting cinematic releases, The Matrix, The Sixth Sense, Star Wars Episode 1, and more, 1999 was peanut butter and jam-packed with films we still love to this day. Sure, The Matrix had Keanu, The Sixth Sense had Brucey Dubs, and Star Wars had Jar Jar, but Universal Pictures' The Mummy had a secret ingredient that was far superior. Forget maple syrup, Canada's sweetest export has always been Brendan Fraser, an actor so handsome he could easily play the heroic lead, but still holds the comedic chops to carry a movie while playing multiple character actor roles. Listen, Hollywood, we'll never forgive you for chewing him up and spitting him out like you did. Just know, Hollywood, you were this close to getting Will Smith by us. This close! We're currently in the Renaissance, okay? So you gotta respect it. Anyways, I'm Joey C, and here's 25 things you missed in The Mummy. Let's go! Besides 1999 being the year of The Matrix, Star Wars, and the Y2K paranoia, it was also the year of Brendan Fraser, with 3 movies that came out with Brendan as the lead. Blast from the Past, Dudley Do Right, and The Mummy all released that year with Fraser as the goofy yet charming protagonist. But he almost missed out on the opportunity to play the dashing Rick O'Connell. The spot was initially offered to Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, and even Tom Cruise. But they all passed on the role, but Tom ultimately snatched it back up when they attempted to reboot The Mummy along with the entire Universal Pictures Monster Cinematic Universe. That's a mouthful, aka the failed MCU. Fraser ultimately got the lead because the director saw him in the stone-cold classic George of the Jungle and thought he was perfect for the character, because he didn't take himself too seriously. But speaking of that terrible Mummy remake, Brendan recently spilled the tea on why he thought the remake failed, mentioning that it was lacking in fun and should be a thrill ride, but not terrifying and scary. The Mummy was an absolute thrill ride, filled with intricate action set pieces and a ton of good old 90s CGI. The effects didn't come cheap, however, as according to Steven Sommers, the average special effects cost was $125 per shot. Which leads us to the obvious conclusion: they had zero CGI budget by the time The Mummy Returns came out. Poor Dwayne and the Scorpion King, they deserved so much better. One of the CGI shots you'd be surprised to learn was in the film was a shot involving Rachel Weisz's character in a white nightgown. After being tossed overboard into the ocean by O'Connell, the dress got wet and subsequently became see-through, revealing a bit too much of the character for the PG-13 rating to allow. The effects team ultimately digitally painted the dress in post. But hey, it's not like Rick O'Connell would have noticed anyhow because, and this is a personal grievance, but he's actively blocking her advances throughout the entire movie. Another CGI shot that snuck its way into the movie involves a very frustrating background actor. Nearing the climax of the movie, a bunch of townspeople are turned into boil-ridden zombies chanting Emotep as they march. In a shot where they're walking alongside the character Benny, the eyes of one of the zombies had to be painted white in post so you couldn't see what he was looking at. This is because during every take, the extra wouldn't stop looking into the barrel of the lens, which is very funny, but also a very expensive fourth wall break, She-Hulk style. A lot of the CGI budget went towards little critters like scarabs and locusts. While the plague of locusts is causing havoc throughout the town, most of the shots were filmed with CGI, but there were also some live grasshoppers used. Before filming, the grasshoppers were chilled in a refrigerator in order to calm them down before filming. Fun fact about this shot, Jonathan Hyde's close-up had to be reshot several times because he could not keep a straight face with so many grasshoppers crawling all over him. Obviously, he would have never made it far on Fear Factor. One of the major shots of the movie that didn't require CGI was the library bookshelf fiasco scene, where Rachel Weisz's character Evelyn was first introduced. The shot where all the bookshelves crashed to the floor like dominoes was shot in one take with a 360-degree camera rig. And although it was Rachel's character who started the chain reaction, the person balancing high on the ladder is actually a man dressed in drag. And if you look very closely, you'll see a mighty straw jawline. Evelyn's very chiseled, let me tell you. Another shot that didn't use CGI, that in retrospect maybe should have, was during the execution scene. Towards the beginning of the film, soon after we're introduced to Rick O'Connell, Brendan Fraser's character is being hanged. Turns out, Brendan actually started getting hanged. Rachel Weisz said that he stopped breathing and had to be resuscitated. Whoa! They almost killed George of the Jungle, man! Thank God they didn't, because there would have been a reckoning. Originally in the 80s, Universal was interested in remaking the 1932 film The Mummy as a horror film, similar to the likes of Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th. Initially, multiple horror directors were attached to The Mummy. Universal offered the film to directors like George Romero and Clive Barker. Romero's vision was, surprise, surprise, going to be a zombie-style horror movie similar to Night of the Living Dead. And Clive Barker's vision was to be a darker sexual version, aka everything else he's ever made. Ultimately, they decided to go with a PG-13 rating, turning to Stephen Sommers, who had just made Deep Rising a year earlier. Rachel Weisz was the only actress offered the role of Evelyn, after the director saw her performance in 1998's The Land Girls. Her character's surname, Carnahan, is a nod to the real historical figure she's based on, Lady Evelyn Herbert, daughter of George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnahan, who was the man responsible for funding the expedition to find King Tut's tomb in 1922. Thus, Evelyn and her brother were to be the children of the cursed Lord Carnahan. Side note, Evelyn is the one that utters the words from the Book of the Dead that brings back Imhotep from the dead, and frankly, she isn't really blamed enough in this movie. I'm sorry, but she just resurrected the most dangerous curse onto the world and never apologizes for it. But that's okay, we can't stay mad at Rachel Weisz forever. We just can't. Speaking of Mrs. Daniel Craig, Weisz was never even a fan of horror films, but nevertheless, she believed The Mummy could be something more. According to Rachel, The Mummy is more like a comic book world than a horror movie, and she's absolutely right. There are scary elements, absolutely, but it's essentially a comedy with a large helping of thrills. Plus, Brendan Fraser is more like a comedic character actor trapped in a leading man's body, but his chops certainly help alleviate the film's tension. Unfortunately for Weisz, not all the effects in the movie could be CGI. In the scene where she's being held down on the sacrificial table, ready to be body-swapped Freaky Friday style with Imhotep's angry dead girlfriend, they decided to use live rats to scurry all over her instead of CGI critters. So when you see her screaming, it's probably safe to assume that she's screaming for real. Odith Fair's character, Ardith Bay, performed the opening voiceover for the movie. Originally, it was intended to be read by Imhotep, but director Stephen Sommers realized after the fact that he wouldn't be able to speak English. Ardith was also initially supposed to have tattoos head to toe, as was customary for Magi warriors. The director ultimately decided against it, stating that he was too handsome to be covered head to toe in tattoos. It's kind of like what my Nana says, "Son, you're too handsome to be covered in tattoos." And we're rambling, but back to the movie. The character did end up having tattoos on his face to pay homage to the Magi. One that spelled underworld in hieroglyph, and a couple that stood for the Egyptian word for truth on his cheeks. Arnold Vosloo had a very interesting take on the Mummy character, which is likely what helped him land the part. Instead of playing into the cheesiness of a resurrected mummy, he approached the character as a man caught in a tragic love story. He wanted to do it absolutely straight, because from Imhotep's point of view, this was a skewed version of Romeo and Juliet. During filming, Vosloo had to be shaved all over his body twice a day, because he was pretty much always half naked. It was also his choice not to wax, because he previously had a traumatic experience with waxing from another project. When designing the look of the mummy, the effects team was told no gore, and they actually did tests for a quote, grossness threshold. I don't know, there are definitely shots that still make me a tad bit queasy. I mean, look at this dude. And there he goes, eating a scarab. I gotta be honest with you, it seems to me that the grossness threshold was definitely crossed. Does anybody feel like throwing up? Production brought a multitude of challenges. For one, they weren't able to film in Egypt due to unstable political conditions. Instead, they moved filming to Morocco, but that was just the beginning of the production's complications. For one, it was hot, like desert hot, because it was filmed in a desert. To avoid dehydration in the scorching heat of the Sahara, the production's medical team created their own original drink that the cast and crew had to consume every 2 hours. To make matters worse, sandstorms were daily inconveniences. Also, spiders, snakes, and scorpions were a major problem. But hey, if you're gonna have a leading man that's similar to Indiana Jones, dealing with snakes really should just be in the character description. Like we said, the film had to be moved out of Egypt for safety reasons. And once they relocated to Morocco, they had the official support of the government military. But apparently, that didn't quite put director Stephen Sommers at ease. Further security measures were taken by taking out kidnapping insurance on the main cast. Yeah, we didn't know that was possible either. The thing is, the cast had no idea that such security measures were taken until after the movie was done filming. Damn Morocco in the 90s, you scary. The Mummy used a ton of real sets for some good old-fashioned in-camera believability, reducing as much computer trickery as they could muster. Fans would be surprised to learn that the movie's version of the hidden ancient city of Hamunaptra was actually built inside of a real volcano. Director Sommers loved it because it just made sense for the story. It being hidden in a volcano in the desert meant people would never actually see it. And people would never dare go near it because it was surrounded by
liquid hot magma.
Luckily, in real life, the volcano was dormant, and the only sparks that flew on screen were that between Rick and Evelyn. See what I did there? Oh, we have fun around here, baby. Speaking of wonderful world building, there's another set in the film that might look familiar to audiences. The Mummy used a mansion in England known as Mentmore Towers to film portions of the library that we see when we're first introduced to Evelyn. Fans might have noticed that they have appeared in other Hollywood productions, namely used as Wayne Manor in Batman Begins. I don't know if a team-up between Rick O'Connell and Batman is all feasible. Maybe Bruce could be collecting art and commissions Rick to snag an Egyptian relic for him. A curse is unleashed upon the land, and it's up to the Bat and the Frenchman to lift it. It's just an idea, but it's a very, very good idea. Speaking of in-camera effects, sometimes the filmmakers had to get a little creative to get their desired outcomes. One of the plagues that Imhotep sets upon the land is hail, but the filmmakers couldn't quite get the hail right at first. Until, that is, they came up with a brilliant but odd solution. If you were to be on set that day, looking up to the sky hoping to catch some snow on your tongue, you'd end up with a mouth full of dry dog food. That's because they made the hail by painting dog food white and dropping it from above the cameras. Tasty puppy chow from heaven, baby. Industrial Light and Magic is known for creating the effects for almost every movie ever, from Star Wars to Thor Love and Thunder. They were also responsible for the majority of the effects used in this film. One effect they didn't expect to make was the muzzle flashes from the guns. That's because the guns never actually worked on set since they kept getting jammed by the sand. Hey man, listen, you know what they say? You go to bed with dogs, you wake up with fleas. You shoot a movie in the desert, and the guns no go boom boom, or something like that. There was going to be a fourth Mummy movie called Rise of the Aztecs, and would introduce Antonio Banderas as the new villain. Ultimately, the studio decided to hold off on the sequel, since they started planning a dark cinematic universe revolving around their classic monsters. They instead turned to developing the reboot starring Tom Cruise in 2017, and we all know how that panned out. The scene in the beginning where Imhotep is mummified freaked out actor Arnold Vosloo. He very much disliked having to be in bandages for 4 hours to film a scene where he's getting wrapped alive and put in his tomb. I swear, it seems like none of these actors would make it past the first round on Fear Factor. Imhotep is a real historic figure, but he wasn't the high priest of Pharaoh Seti I. He was the architect who developed the first pyramids in ancient Egypt, most notably the pyramid of Pharaoh Djoser, around 2600 BC. But that doesn't mean he wasn't popular though. In fact, he was so popular with the local people that he was later said to have descended from the gods. His name means one who comes in peace. And as far as anyone knows, he was not a despised villain as portrayed in the movie, but much more likely revered as the architect and physician that he was. Anaxunamun, Imhotep's girlfriend, that he's desperate to resurrect, was an Egyptian princess who was the half-sister and wife, Game of Thrones style, to Pharaoh Tut. The Mummy not only pays homage to history, but to its cinematic ancestor as well. While Evelyn is fighting Anaxunamun, Jonathan is trying to read the spell and gets caught up on the symbol of a stork. Evelyn tells him it means Amenaphus. This is a callback to the source material, the original The Mummy that came out in 1932, which heavily inspired director Stephen Sommers to take on the project. In the original, Amenaphus was the name of Anaxunamun's father, making her the pharaoh's daughter instead of his mistress. The film was a massive success, making $410 million from a budget of $80 million. That the studio ordered a sequel the morning after it came out. According to Summers, Universal called him the very next day after opening and said, "We need another one." Fun fact, in 1999's The Mummy, Brendan Fraser plays a character that is part of a group that accidentally brings an evil mummy back to life. In contrast, in 1992's Encino Man, Brendan Fraser plays a lovable dopey caveman who is accidentally brought back to life. And in the mid-2000s, Fraser's career was essentially dead. But recently, his career has been brought back to life, and is now what fans are calling the Brennaissance. And man, we are glad to have him back. Ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else in between, you made it to the end of the video. What did you think of The Mummy? Are you excited for the future of the Brennaissance? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, everybody, thanks for watching.